So what I really want to do is talk about, what is this new architecture that we need to really drive the kind of transformation that we need to deal with the climate crisis. When you go down to Lima, you're going to see, both inside the formal negotiating halls and all around, you're going to see elements of this new architecture. I want to kind of talk to you about that and kind of sensitize you to it, because I think that it's really kind of critical. And what I find is that you'll hear a lot of different perspectives about what we need to do about climate change. A lot of it depends on, where people stand on an issue depends a lot on where they sit. And I think and what we saw as early as 1997, when this cartoon appeared, was that there was already a significant implementation gap between what needed to be done, what leaders promised to do, and what was actually happening on the ground. And what we saw was too often leaders would say, oh, well, I signed a treaty or I went to a conference, that's all I got to do. Well, the reality is that's just the absolute beginning. The other dynamic is we've seen world leaders constantly kick this issue down the road. When I started NRDC's climate change work in 1989, 1990, we literally thought, we were worried about what was going to happen at the end of the 21st century. I said, this is an issue that I'm working on for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. No one predicted how quickly emissions would rise with the emergence of India and China, and Brazil and other countries. Nobody predicted that we would actually see climate change now. This is like flabbergasted. We thought this was something at the end of the 21st century. It's now at the beginning of the 21st century. And so but what we've seen within negotiations, and you'll see evidence of this in Lima, is they're not going to be talking about what needs to be done today. They're going to be talking about what needs to be done post-2020 or post-25 or post-50, which is all important to have a goal. But the reality is, if you spend all your time worried about where you're going to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you forget about the fact that if you're going to move down that path, you have to start now. So what is this new architecture? Well, Hillary Clinton says it has to look less like a Greek temple. Okay, this is the UN. Every single column is exactly the same. All 192 of them. That's what holds the roof up. And as you can imagine, it's hard to get 192 countries to agree what time of day it is, let alone a comprehensive plan to deal with a problem like climate change. It's extraordinarily important for its legitimacy and its universality, but the basic architecture is not well adapted for dealing with a problem like climate change and many other global problems, which we can talk about more. What she says is the architecture should look more like a Frank Gehry building, which recognizes all these different players. I like to remind people, Walmart has 1 million employees. It's the biggest retailer on the planet. It has much more impact socially and environmentally on the world than probably half the countries that are now parts of the UN. But Walmart doesn't have a seat at the table. So it's just getting people to realize there are a lot of other players, and if we're going to make a rapid transition to deal with climate change, we have to figure out a way to get them all engaged. Sometimes say, I love the United Nations. They have one foot firmly in the 21st century and the other foot firmly in the 1950s. One of the problems that you'll find in international negotiations is there's a lag time. You'll get certain developing countries that completely get this, and you get the Mexicans, and you get sometimes from time to time the Indians and the Chinese sort of recognizing that they need to move forward with this. You'll have other developing country representatives that will kind of fall back on the kind of rhetoric that we heard in 1992 and 1997, which simply doesn't fit the reality of today's world. The problem with the treaty-making system and what we've been trying to push on is it's too static. By the time you make an agreement, it's out of date almost, because the world's changing way too fast. So part of the problem we have is we're still looking at the world from the lens of the Kyoto Protocol, which is completely, totally out of date. It was 1997. The world's fundamentally changed. And we've had this huge fight about, can we get every country to make a commitment? But the point is that, yes, I think it's wonderful. Let's get the Chinese to make a major commitment to national. Let's get the U.S. government to make a commitment. But the reality is that's not how the change is going to come about.